Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
China's cyber program is by far and away the world's largest, bigger than that of every major nation combined, and has stolen more of Americans' personal and corporate data than that of every nation, big or small, combined. But even beyond the cyber theft, there's another part of the Chinese cyber threat that I think has not gotten the attention publicly that it, I think, desperately deserves, and that is Chinese government's pre-positioning on American civilian critical infrastructure to lie in wait on those networks, to be in a position to wreak havoc and can inflict real-world harm at a time and place of their choosing.
The Chinese have already insinuated malware into critical American infrastructure.
That's correct.
Like what?
Things like water treatment plants. We're talking about transportation systems. We're talking about targeting of our energy sector, the electric grid, natural gas pipelines. And recently, we've seen targeting of our telecommunications system.
China's cyber war on America and our allies. Welcome to More War Monday, folks. And the Rob Maness Show is live on Worldview Tube, X-Spaces simulcast, and our Truth Social Plus channel. Well, friends, as you just heard, the Chinese state-sponsored hacking groups have been targeting U.S. critical infrastructure since at least mid-2021, and the confirmed targets include communications, energy, transportation, water systems, and other sectors, even in U.S. territories like the island of Guam. What is America doing to defend itself against these ticking time bombs placed by China? These attacks dramatically increased in 2024 and appear to be continuing at an ever-increasing pace already this year. The digital battlefield is difficult to see due to its nature, but we do have large agencies and departments like the Defense Department that are established to defend us and fight in that domain. Congress is paying attention also and supports the effort, but do we have the right strategic policies, defensive and offensive capabilities to be successful? With these current reports seemingly every day, the incoming Trump administration has an opportunity to do an immediate cyber warfare posture review to establish a more effective direction if there's a viable one available to us. Well, my guest today to discuss all this is Lori Buckhout. Lori's a retired U.S. Army colonel and decorated combat commander, including commanding hundreds of troops in a task force as part of the initial spearhead attack into Iraq in 2003. She's an expert in cyber and electronic warfare. She founded her own highly successful business after military retirement, the Corvus Consulting and Strategic Consulting Services Group, also specializing in electronic warfare and cyberspace operations, and has served in various other capacities in the cyber and electronic warfare field across government, such as in the Department of Commerce and the commercial industry. Lori was also the GOP nominee for North Carolina's 1st Congressional District last year and endorsed by President Trump. Colonel, welcome to the Rob Maness Show.
Colonel, good to be here. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Good to see you.
It's good to see you. Thank you so much for coming on. Look, I've been trying to do a lot of shows that kind of incrementally discuss cyber warfare, cyber operations, but nothing seems to resonate with the public. We have unbelievable numbers of successful attacks. FBI Director Wray likens what's happening with China's state actors as an invasion, literally placing cyber time bombs on critical infrastructure and those kind of things like that. Does he have the right sight picture on what's really happening? And is there anything from a policy perspective, which is what I want to get into with you in this first segment, especially from a national military strategy, national security strategy, policy perspective, that we need to change because we don't seem to be making any headway from a defensive posture?
As a retired Air Force colonel, I know you understand electronic warfare and you understand cyberspace based on your resume, right? So you understand how difficult it is to make people understand what they can't see every day and to understand invisible forces. And to most folks, cyber is invisible. I mean, if you look at this, the majority of Americans have no idea how this thing works. They don't understand that viruses can be put into it. They don't understand how it can be shut off. They don't understand how China is always listening to this thing every day, all the time. They don't understand that every text they send, every conversation they have is being listened to by China. I mean, by China at a minimum, right? People have a hard time understanding. They think this is magic, and they don't understand the invisible waves that take to communicate with it. So it's very hard for people to understand what they can't see every day.
Yeah, so does that cross streams? I mean, you and I were in the military, so we're accustomed to dealing with this domain, the digital domain, which is cyber and electronic warfare. But in other government agencies and the commercial industry, when we're talking about cyber operations security and electronic warfare, does that lack of understanding on the public's part extend into those types of capabilities and facilities?
I think it really does. We have talked about where the Chinese started to attack us and when they did. So what a lot of folks don't know is that the Chinese were inside of our networks at least in 2005 and probably earlier. I know you're a fellow Joint Staff buddy. I was in there, I guess, 2005 when I came back from Iraq. And we discovered the Chinese were inside DoD networks. So it was a group called Byzantine Candor that is now out there, on the internet. And a NSA guy went and talked to Congress about it, and that actually helped create U.S. Cyber Command and all of the services cyber commands, Army Cyber Command, Air Force Cyber Command, et cetera, because we began to realize China had these abilities. Since then, it's only accelerated. We do have a national cyber strategy that is a bipartisan document. As the years have gone by, the government has put more cyber infrastructure in place, more cyber organizations in place. But something tells me there are disconnects. You know what it's like with a bunch of units out there, and you've got gaps and seams between them, and you don't have perfect coordination. I think that's a big part of why we are still getting attacked.
Yeah. So yeah, we do have a cyber national security strategy. We have these policies. We have the organizations in the government, both in defense and I'm assuming in the intelligence agencies outside of the Defense Department, from what I understand and everything. What do you see as a way that could be improved upon? Because quite honestly, I don't know if you're looking, but we're getting our butts handed to us.
Yeah.
And policy drives everything from the strategic down to the tactical level when it comes to this kind of stuff, even if folks don't realize it. So at the strategic policy level, what needs to change?
Well, I think the first thing is that people really need to understand the situation. You've done your mission planning. You know how it goes. It always starts with what's the situation here, right? And as you said, a lot of folks don't understand that. So, let's do a real quick recap just on the unclassified side of what it looks like right now. So as you said, they're inside things like water treatment plants. They could shut off our water. They could poison our water. They could manipulate it. They're inside of our electrical grid. They could shut it off, they can manipulate it, they can do things to it. And they've gone over years quietly infiltrated through software backdoors, through phishing attempts, and things like that. They've gotten into these networks. So they're all over our infrastructure. They're inside of our internet providers. They're inside of all of our cell phone providers. So they're everywhere, right? Now let's talk about our defense systems. All of our weapon systems and installation software capabilities protected. An NDAA came out in 2017 to enforce that, but it's something that needs constant work. I remember Army installations being shut down because our non-secure internet was infiltrated, right? Viruses got in, and those are the ones we know about. We recently had China cut a cable, an underseas cable going to Taiwan. Of course, that's somebody that we want to take care of is Taiwan. They're inside of our port operations, so if we wanted to launch forces to help Taiwan or any other ally, or just have forces out there on the open ocean, they're inside of our port operations, and they could shut that down. So the situation is they're everywhere: public infrastructure, government infrastructure, military infrastructure, and they could impact your day and everybody else's pretty much at a snap. So that's the situation. I think a lot of folks don't understand that.
So you're telling me I live within view of a port here in Gulfport, Mississippi. It has 3 large Chinese manufactured cranes on it for unloading and loading container ships.
Wow.
You're telling me the Chinese are inside that and they could control it?
They're inside. They're inside port operations. So, let's think about that. All the logistics that have to take place to move things in and out of a port. If they can disrupt logistics, moving container ships in and out, somebody loses all the internet's down and a ship can't get directions. It's sitting in the middle of the bay there in the middle of the port. It needs to move, but there's no way to get it directions because everything is digital now, right? You shut that down. Right. I mean, what does it do to a port? It can be there's so many ways to do it. It kind of boggles the imagination. But yes, you're right. Those cranes could be part of it.
Yeah, it does. And I'm assuming that inside the cranes, they have computerization. And if it's a Chinese device, then they have access to all of the hard-coded coding, the chips, everything, right?
Well, absolutely. And, I read an estimate, something like 80% of all software is somewhere along the line written in China. So there's some sort of a component, because, you take coding and most of it is just copied and then you change it a little bit and things like that, because it's really hard to write everything from scratch. So I have heard estimates of 80% of software is touched by PLA hands somewhere along the line. And that's printers, that's controllers for dams, controllers for electrical grids, all sorts of stuff.
That's incredible, Lori. It's I'm chuckling out of nervousness because if you're a citizen, you're a citizen and you're seeing and hearing all these reports. And we don't seem to be defending ourselves. So when we go into this next segment, I want to get you to talk about these different types of names that we keep hearing. Names like Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon. I think I heard a new one in researching for the show, Flax Typhoon, and those types of things. But I also want to get you to describe to the American people what they might be able to do to help, because I think it takes all of us. This domain crosses not just military targets, but into commercial and right down to residential targets. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so unique. Just like in my opening when I talked about how the air, sea, land, and space domains all are blanketed by the cyber and digital domain that cyber warfare and electronic warfare encompass. That makes it very, very unique from a targeting perspective. because you're not out plinking hard targets versus military targets versus civilian targets. You're blanketing these targets with digital operations that can't be seen with the naked eye. So we'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show on Worldview Tube with Lori Buckhout, retired U.S. Army colonel, cyber warfare and electronic warfare expert. I'm Rob Maness.
But what's notable here is the level of sophistication we're seeing by Chinese hackers. You mentioned the dizzying array of Salt Typhoon, Flax Typhoon. We also have Volt Typhoon, which showed that Chinese malicious actors were pre-positioning critical infrastructure, saying, in the event of a conflict, we can shut down power and water systems. So right now, I think we're in a period of potentially significant uncertainty in the relationship, and China's capabilities have certainly improved in ways that are very concerning to U.S. officials.
Yeah, Volt Typhoon you just talked about. This is interesting. When we talk about a major conflict, at the moment we've got a potential trade war with China. What does major conflict mean? Does that mean if China goes into Taiwan and the U.S. decides it's going to stand up for Taiwan, that China has potential ability to disrupt infrastructure in America?
We have to look at cyber attacks as an extension of military power. And in the event of an armed...
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and China's cyber warfare on the United States and our allies is continuing. And as you just heard there and heard in the first segment, it's not just continuing, it's increasing, and they're becoming much, much more effective at what they're doing. My guest today is retired U.S. Army Colonel Lori Buckhout, a cyber warfare and electronic warfare expert. Lori, I think the last comment in that little clip there is probably the key to this segment, and that is that these cyber moves, they're an extension of military power. Cyber power is an extension of military power, if I'm paraphrasing it correctly. And that gets me to one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because you've got a lot of experience, not only in the Army, but in the civilian government and the commercial industry, because this domain crosses everything. Since it's viewed that way as an extension of military power, when China, a nation state, is conducting these operations against us, let's just narrow it down to just the United States, it really is warfare. And there are documents where they've declared that they're in what they call unrestricted warfare, which doesn't include kinetic until the very end, really. Even if they actually go there, they would prefer not to. So if this is warfare, what is the United States defense establishment doing to defend us if all we ever see is increasing effectiveness from China? I mean, for goodness sake, when I hear they're putting time bomb software packages on our utility operations, on our port operations, our water treatment facilities, and our plumbing, how do we address that? We just let them sit there?
That is just such a great question. And it's interesting you bring that up, because when I was in the Joint Staff, that's when we had some of the attacks going on, and I was part of the folks leading the response out of the Joint Staff and dealing with Secretary of State. What do you do after you know they're in your networks? So first of all, they always deny it, right? Which makes it a little bit awkward. Yeah, we're not doing anything, so you kind of have to deal with that from the diplomatic point of view. And then second of all, we know a few things that have come out in the public sector. There's more stuff going on behind the scenes in the classified manner, right? Now, we also have to understand that the U.S. doesn't have just defensive capabilities. We have offensive capabilities as well. So for everything they do, in an unclassified format, I'm not going to tell you everything we're doing, but you can be sure we're not just sitting on our hands. So we're giving them hell on networks as well. And we're not going to tell them everything we're doing, and we're not going to tell them every time we know we're being attacked, because sometimes we want to use their attack vector to go back at them. Mm-hmm. So if they're sneaking in, we want to track them and see their footprints in and out of our network so we can follow them back to wherever they're going. So it's sort of a cat and mouse game, spy versus spy, if you will. It's not as straightforward as we like to think. So we're not going to be launching, artillery in on the Chinese mainland over this. We are striking back, but our defenses have to get better. We have to have a better coordinated response across agencies, across civil organizations, across our civilian infrastructure. We have to do better at protecting.
And on this offensive capability perspective, I was watching Congressman Mike Waltz, the incoming National Security Advisor, in an interview a few days ago, talking about defensive and offensive cyber capabilities. And he made a comment. He said, we have to field offensive capabilities that are capable of deterring them from doing this, akin to like nuclear deterrences. But if we don't tell anybody that we have this offensive capability, how can that establish deterrence in the mind? Because deterrence is relative. It's got to establish in the mind of the adversary that the risk is too high to take the action they're considering taking because of the response they know they'll get. How would that work?
Yeah, I think we need to schwack them a few times. As cyber-wise, we don't necessarily need to tell the American public or tell the Chinese public or tell anybody. You schwack them a few times, and we are. I think we need to probably be more aggressive. But I think that's what Mike Waltz was talking about. We have to go after them so they understand that anytime they come after us, there's going to be a rapid retaliation and a rapid response. Just like just like them attacking us, they're saying, "Oh, we would never do that." I mean, we have to have the same sort of attitudes, like, we're not touching you. I don't know what's going on, why our networks are down, but we're not touching you. And, by the way, going back to this creature right here, did you know the FBI has put out a warning that you should be on Signal or on Telegram every time you talk or text on this thing? I mean, and nobody's doing that. But the FBI, who loves to surveil American citizens, is telling us all to go to encrypted applications when you use your cell phone. That's got to tell you something.
Yeah. And what the American citizens know, that the FBI is surveilling them. And you know what, one of the comments that I've had from my audience when that report came out and that guidance came out, well, they're herding you into their apps that they have backdoors into so they can further complete their surveillance loop on you. That's where we're at in this country today. That is exactly where we're at.
The lack of trust is amazing, but I have read that Signal is a great encrypted app, and I personally use Signal a lot. I like that. It's just personal stuff,
Yeah, I'm on Signal and use it for all kinds of things, texting, phone calls, and those kind of things. I also have a Proton Mail email address that I use for my work because that's supposed to be encrypted too. and that leads me to one of my questions is, look, self-defense in the United States is a ingrained principle in the population of the country. It's documented in things like the Second Amendment. So one of the most common questions I get is about other things like the fires out in LA or potential Islamist attacks. What can we do as citizens? What can we look for? And how do we take an appropriate action that can help this situation? What should the government be advising citizens of in this, or what could we do to improve how we're doing that? I honestly haven't ever seen a public service announcement from an agency that said, "Hey, citizens, be on the lookout for X, Y, and Z. If you see it, send us an email or take a screenshot of it and text it to us." That's very, very rare unless it's a specific crime or anything. So what can people do to be on the lookout for this type of activity and maybe identify some of this stuff and help?
You really hit the nail on the head. There is a lack of public awareness, and that extends to people, like I said, people who run our water treatment plants, people who run our electrical grids, right? We are not sounding the alarm, just like you said earlier, and that's perfectly said. So, we look at a problem, and you and I think in a certain way because we're military, and so much of this, I think, comes down to leadership. And we can talk about what citizens can do, but I tend to look at the big picture, as do you, and part of the big picture problem here is a lack of leadership on the behalf of cyber leadership in the country. You have tons of organizations doing cyber all over the place. What is the coordination? And you and I know from a friendly and enemy point of view, the enemy is always looking for gaps and seams in between units to attack, right? And I think that they have found them. They found them in places like our port operations. They found them in our electrical grids. They found them in software where you have backdoors written in. So we have not done, I don't think, a good job in leadership. And this is not to poke anybody in the eye, but from a military point of view that you and I share, we understand the necessary means to coordinate across organizations and how somebody has to be in charge. So I think we need to do a better job at that. When it comes to the citizenry, boy, there's basics. Like on this laptop I'm with right now, and on my phone, we talked about the encryption stuff. On all of your automation you have in your home, password protection, updating passwords, downloading virus protectors, good ones, right? I use ESET, that's a great one, but there's a lot of them out there. Updating frequently, updating your software frequently, whatever Windows you have, or if you're on Apple or something, to make sure that you're doing all the patches as you should. So civilians need to be thinking about that. As far as government goes, and well, let's go to corporate. One of the big things happening in corporate, they get hacked because of phishing attempts, where employees are not educated not to click on links, or whaling, where they're going after CEOs and stuff like that. They get in there through malware, through malicious software that comes in that something is not patched or updated, and you're on the internet and somebody goes after you. So you have CISOs who are not updating their software. And here's an element that I'm going to talk about that I don't think we're talking about enough. Do you have an estimation of how many hundreds of thousands of Chinese have come across our border in the last few years?
You're beating me to my question. The latest numbers I have, and these are just estimates, the estimates that I have are over 100,000 of Chinese military-age males. And we're not tracking on them, or at least most of them.
We're not. And and I know that China is a totalitarian state. You don't leave China unless they want you to leave China, and you leave there with purpose and intent, right? So all these folks coming in, what are they doing? I mean, they're in our universities, they're in our workforce, the ones that are working, and the ones that are not working, what are they up to? And we're not tracking them. Like I said, there's Chinese individuals all over our universities. It's just kind of mind-blowing. Who was it, Dianne Feinstein, who had a Chinese spy for a driver for 20 years?
20 years. 20 years. That's right. Well, we got to take another break, Lori. When we come back, though, I want to hit those ops names again, just to give my audience an expert's view of what all these operation names are for, before we dive some more into the cyber warfare that China's conducting on us, and what might those Chinese military-age males be doing in this regard here in the United States, and why? When we come right back on the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday here on Worldview Tube.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
So the U.S. Department of Treasury just became a hacking victim, and they say a Chinese operation is to blame for this. NBC5's Christian Farr reports on what's being called a major incident.
Unfortunately, I think this is capping off what has been an incredibly impactful cybersecurity year.
Cybersecurity experts are reacting after the U.S. Treasury Department says its computers were hacked by a state-sponsored Chinese hacking operation. The FBI has not revealed what they were searching for, but cybersecurity experts say the Treasury Department encompasses the IRS, which could cause concern for the American public.
The IRS obviously has a ton of sensitive information on U.S. citizens. So if it's found that that information was compromised, that could be very impactful on individuals.
The Treasury Department says the so-called threat actor was able to access department workstations by using third-party software. Cybersecurity experts say 90% of cyber attacks happen through phishing, which is a practice of sending fraudulent messages by email or social media.
We have to do a better job in educating people about phishing. Companies and government entities need to be constantly running phishing exercises on their people to figure out who's clicking on stuff they shouldn't be clicking on.
Cybersecurity experts say people might want to request a PIN number from the IRS so you will not have issues filing your taxes.
If this breach turns into something very large that impacts all of us as taxpayers, it could help to mitigate the risk that someone's going to go and file your tax return for you, which can be really a nightmare situation for all of us.
The Treasury Department says that they should have more information about this hack in the next month or so. In Streeterville, Christian Farr, NBC5 News.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and China is conducting cyber warfare on the United States and our allies. My guest today is retired U.S. Army Colonel Lori Buckhout, also a former congressional candidate in North Carolina, was the GOP nominee endorsed by President Trump last year. Lori, okay, operation names: Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, and now Flax Typhoon, which is the operation name that was associated with that Treasury Department hack based on what I've seen so far. Are these American names, kind of like we used to name Soviet aircraft with Americanized names, even though the Soviets called them something else, that we've attached to these? And what are the differences between those?
You know, that's a great question. As far as it's our name or their name, I'm not sure, to tell you the truth. So I actually had to look it up because there's so many of them running around. So I'll give you just a quick rundown. Flax Typhoon is mostly apparently focused on Taiwan, and these are groups, hacking groups within the the Chinese army who do this sort of thing. So there's specific groups that work to attack, and hack and attack across networks. So Flax Typhoon has been mostly focused on Taiwan, and they are getting inside Taiwan's infrastructure, their military infrastructure, their civil infrastructure, and just kind of hanging around and waiting. So they're in there ready to cause mischief when they need to, which is, of course, bad news. The next one is Volt Typhoon. A Volt Typhoon is also going after critical infrastructure and pre-positioning themselves inside, and they're attacking us and others, but they're going after their enemy's critical infrastructure, not focusing on Taiwan, focusing on us. Salt Typhoon, those are the folks who have been inside the wireless infrastructure, our telecom infrastructure. And Silk Typhoon are the guys who have been inside the Treasury. And as you know, they were inside our Treasury Department. They're going after the organizations that actually dealt with China in trade, and dealt with China in sale of U.S. land to China, which, by the way, I think ought to be outlawed.
I agree with you on that. I didn't pick up that one. Silk Typhoon. Okay, I got it. We've got some hands up in the audience. I want to take some questions there, at least one for this segment. So our host over there is Shell. Shell, what's the first question for Colonel Buckout?
We have Larry Brock, sir.
Yes, ma'am. I know it's a matter of debate, but does the United States have an official position on when a cyber attack becomes an act of war?
I would have to take a quick look at that and look that up. I do remember in 2005, 2006, when the Chinese were inside of our Department of Defense networks, there was a big discussion on when it becomes an act of war and what our action was going to be. How do we retaliate? Do we do a démarche? Do we put it out publicly that we know that they were attacked? And it took some time for us to do that, by the way, because once you tell someone you've been attacked, they know it was successful, right? If you can keep it under wraps and you don't tell the Chinese that their attack was successful, they may not know exactly how much they were able to infiltrate inside your network. So that is a very good question. I probably need to spin myself up on that. I think it varies a lot in terms of damage, in terms of what was able to have been compromised, and when you want to tell folks about that. Largely, cyber is a silent war.
Yeah, do you think, especially if, as a hypothetical, say they go ahead and initiate kinetic operations against Taiwan to invade and forcefully bring them into the PRC, and simultaneously they cyber attack us and our allies to delay us, prevent us from responding, put our eyes out, so to speak, and our ears out. If they did that simultaneously, it might be considered more an act of war in that case than, say, the situation you were talking about, 2005, 2006, where, they were in our defense networks, and they were in some really interesting areas, if I remember correctly. That's about as far as I'm going to go. But I never heard a serious discussion about, oh man, this is an act of war, because it wasn't linked to anything that was potentially causing a loss of a vital interest to the United States, in my opinion. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and that is kind of the case. And again, like I said, if you acknowledge it, it means they know they were successful. So there's a fine line to walk there. I think as far as an act of war goes, there's rules of engagement, and those change depending on who the commander-in-chief is and the situation. I think there's fluid rules of engagement when it does come to cyber warfare, depending on the situation.
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, let's take another question. We've got several hands now over in the audience. Go ahead, Shell. Who's next?
We have Wib, sir. Thank you, Shell, and thank you, Colonel, and the previous caller, Colonel. I'm wondering how you guys touched on communication, collaboration with the private sector, and so forth. What would you do? I know I have some suggestions that I would love to give, but what suggestions would you give to improve the current TLP, sticks, taxi systems that we currently have?
You know, my comment about leadership was for me, I think that's the most important aspect of cybersecurity in America today. Having an educated and forceful leadership stance so we can start to bring government and industry together. I don't think we have that yet. I think we're too bifurcated. I think we have too many organizations, and you need to have a lot of organizations doing cyber because you need to be attacking it from all different aspects, and you need to be attacking it quickly because technology changes so fast. But I think you do need to have better leadership, you need to have better standards, and you got to have better constant communication between industry and government on best practices, patches, and all the methods and measures that we need to be taking. I just don't think we have strong enough national posture on cyber right now.
From a organizational perspective, Lori, periodically we go through in the military and we change our organizations. We change the command and control links, the spaghetti chart or the wiring diagram to try to improve things. I remember when I was on the Joint Staff, I hated having to go to the Joint Interagency Task Force meetings because nobody was in charge, and a lot of things were talked about, but nothing ever happened out of those meetings. And then with this domain, you add in commercial over that, and then in the next segment we'll talk about the allies a little bit more, and those things, and that it crosses every other physical domain, including space. What type of organizational changes could we make based on where we're at today, which I don't think we've really made many changes since we first set up Cyber Command on the military side, and I'm not sure that there's a civilian version of it to address the commercial sector. Maybe you saw some of that in the Department of Commerce when you were there.
You know, you truly are my spirit animal. This is kind of wild. So you remember on the Joint Staff do you ever need any deep program dives where you're basically looking at all the capabilities you should have and then laying out every single organization, and you're almost doing a matrix of capability to the organization, and then you're tying them all together and seeing the gaps and seams. I don't know the last time it was that we did that. I think a lot of folks don't understand how to do that. They don't understand large organization and how to make it work together. And your experience with the Joint Interagency Task Force really sort of, brings that home. Some folks just don't know how to get organizations to work together. And the first analysis that needs to be done is looking at the mission of every single one, looking at the overall mission that needs to be accomplished, and then looking at the mission of every single organization. Where are the gaps? Where are we dropping the ball? I remember in another Joint Staff incident working with Katrina. The Hurricane Katrina came in and what a mess that was.
Yeah.
I was in the Joint Staff J6, so we were working current communications capabilities. And the coordination between cell phone providers and the government was just a mess. And some changes were made as a result of that. But the cooperation and the linkages between civilian communications, especially that in emergency situations, and the government, they were very broken. We could not find out where there were active cell phone providers, active communications, and people were dying. So some changes were made as a result of that, but that's not something you can let go. You have to do that all the time. It's like a continuous improvement thing. So, I keep going back to having a big assessment of where we really stand. I don't think we know how many gaps we have because I don't think we've really dug into the entire ball of wax.
Yeah, I think we need to establish an ongoing process like you're talking about, something that may be similar to, you remember the old nuclear posture review we were required to do every so often. I was in joint nuke ops is what my primary area was in J38, what was J38 then in the joint staff. But we also found after 9/11, I was also part of a team trying to help put the response together. And this is where you don't want to be. We discovered that the combatant commands were not designed to fight a global war, and our resourcing was not designed to fight a global war. So the joint staff team that I was part of had to figure out, how do we share the limited resources that the combatant commanders need now, right now, after an attack like what's happened on 9/11, and that's where we don't want to be. So we got to take our last break, Laura. When we come back, we'll dive into our allies and add that into the mix of this coordination and action, planning, coordination, and action. That's what it takes in order to be able to respond effectively, but also to be preemptive and proactive out there so that your defenses are acting like a shield instead of having to get it penetrated and then having to respond. We'll be right back on More War Monday with Lori Burkhout and Worldview YouTube.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Is the government tracking you? Do they have access to all your data? Well, if you go to worldviewtalk.com, you'll find out about a cell phone company that, does not store your data. They don't do that. This is what they're known for. They don't store your data. You have privacy. You're not being tracked. That's why a lot of folks are turning to worldviewtalk.com. You'll find their prices are very competitive. All the details are there at worldviewtalk.com. Again, worldviewtalk.com. Oh, while you're there, not only do they have cell phones that aren't tracking you, you can find out about how to get a satellite phone. Should the whole system go down and you want to communicate with a family member or a loved one, you might want to have a satellite phone. Or how about their solar generators? They have great solar generators. Check them all out right now. Worldviewtalk.com, worldviewtalk.com.
Cyber attacks on Taiwanese institutions have doubled in the last year, with the vast majority of those attacks coming from China. That's according to a report by Taiwan's intelligence agency. The National Security Bureau says the average number of attacks on Taiwanese systems increased twofold, from 1.2 million to 2.4 million attacks per day from 2023 to 2024. The agency has said they're able to fend off most of those attacks, but that the sheer volume of activity just demonstrates the increasingly severe nature of China's hacking activities. The report says that most attacks, around 80%, target government networks, and that there's been a steep rise in attacks on the telecommunications sector, financial institutions, transport networks, and even defense supply chains, as well as private businesses. The report also said that hacking methods are becoming increasingly sophisticated, using a range of techniques from DOS attacks to phishing email campaigns and Trojan and backdoor viruses. So, what is China's goal here? The government networks targeted by these attacks facilitate communication channels between different agencies and host online services where people pay taxes or store national health or labor insurance data. All of that could prove valuable information for China, which, remember, claims Taiwan and has said it will take it by any means necessary. Access to confidential information and networks could help China take Taiwan offline and disrupt infrastructure across the country should they ever decide to make a move. Taking down transport networks, financial services, energy grids would all make an attack or a blockade of Taiwan much easier and could even send Taiwan into a state of panic. But Taiwan won't take all of this lying down. Part of President Lai Ching-de's Civil Defense Committee plan is to improve Taiwan's national technological resilience and also to raise public awareness about the threats from China in regards to stealing Taiwan's most sensitive information. Justin Wu, John Su, and Reese Ayres in Taipei for Taiwan Plus.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and we're talking China's cyber war on the United States and our allies. And my guest today is retired U.S. Army Colonel Lori Buckhout, who is a cyber warfare expert and electronic warfare expert. As a matter of fact, she was once the president of an association I'm a member of called the Association of Old Crows. We're the electronic warfare. They called us beeps and squeaks guys in the Air Force. But one of the things I wanted to mention here is that was only about Taiwan, which we talked about the internet cable being cut. I think it was last week, earlier in the show. But if you paid attention to the numbers there, 2.4 million hacking attacks or cyber penetration attempts every single day in 2024 against Taiwan. Now it's an easy vector because it's an island, so and it's in one direction, so it's a simpler targeting set from a line of approach perspective, not necessarily from a target perspective. But I could have pulled up a clip, and there was one from Japan being attacked over and over again by Chinese nation-state actors. The Philippines Armed Forces, ports, all being hacked into an attack by Chinese state actors. And they're all in the last year. So they've been very successful, and they are targeting our allies. Because at first when I thought about it, well, maybe they're just trying to soften up the United States, get into our systems so that if they do, get into a conflict with us, they're ready. But no, they really are looking at our allies, and with Taiwan being the centerpiece of that effort in the Pacific itself, it gets me to my question about to expand it from, okay, we have a military problem, but we've also got a interagency problem in the civilian government combined with a commercial problem. And then you add the allied countries and their military, civilian government, and commercial problems to this challenge. And that's a big organizational construct that has to be looked at very carefully to see how we can do this better. I mean, because we're having some successes. We don't hear about 2.4 million attacks a day being successful in Taiwan or any place else, really. I don't know what the numbers are on the United States, but we hear about the ones that are successful, not the millions of attacks that are actually happening. So we have to have some successes, but what about all the lines of communication that need to be coordinating effectively, both for defense, and then if we need to make a decision on whether to go offensive or not, all of those players, when it comes to the PRC, are going to have to be involved in one way or another, aren't they?
Yeah, I completely agree. And, your background is really coming into play as I listen to you because you understand joint interagency coalition and the need to have those communication lines open and the cooperation that needs to be going on 24/7 between these agencies. So I know we have good interagency and coalition network set up to share information. I know we're sharing a lot of security measures through our own cyber command with other nations out there to make sure we've got a united front going on. But you're absolutely right. And, I think you said early in the program or on another program that we think in quarters like 3 months of the year, and China's thinking in 100-year increments. So they've been thinking about this for a long time. I know you've read the book Unrestricted Warfare, which is basically by any means necessary to, achieve Chinese global hegemony. And, we don't talk about that enough. And as you said early in the program, American citizens do not understand how incredibly serious these attacks are every single day. Interagency and coalition communication can always be improved upon, and the understanding of China as a threat that they really are to the entire globe always needs to be made clear to everybody. They're teaming up with Russia and Iran right now. Luckily, the economies of all three nations are not doing very well, but that makes you wonder: are they going to be more aggressive because they do not have a strong economy, and they're not necessarily going to have the kinetic forces that we are? Are they going to be more aggressive on the internet or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. And usually authoritarian countries, when they get in a tight spot domestically, what do they tend to do historically? Initiate some kind of external kinetic operation or warfare. So we've got to be stronger than we are today, in my opinion. I'm glad President Trump got elected because I'm a little bit familiar. I'm quite familiar with his campaign promise of peace through strength and get the focus on the big adversary, which is China and everything. Well, we've got some more hands. Let's go ahead and take some questions before we get to the end of the show and see what the audience is thinking. Go ahead, Shel.
We have Angela, sir. Hi, thank you guys. I know that I hear y'all talk about the naval readiness, and now we have cyber attacks and then our border. Why is China allowed to own so much land in America if they are a threat the way that they are?
That's a great question. Loria, go ahead, give your thoughts on it, and then I'll give mine.
Foreign ownership of land.
We're both opposed to it.
We both hate it. Foreign ownership of land really needs to be looked at. I know that there are members of Congress right now that I talked to when I was running who pledged to carry the banner to ban foreign ownership, or at least those of adversary countries, and to be able to take back land that has been bought by countries that turn adversarial. I mean, not every country is an adversary overnight. If something turns adversarial, we need to have the wherewithal to take that land back. Our own eminent domain, if you will. Rob, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely, Lori. And I'll just add the current subject into this mix. The cyber warfare and electronic warfare. A lot of these land purchases, as a matter of fact, most of them are near military or sensitive government facilities that we need to have operational to defend ourselves and to conduct operations from and to in a time of war. And it's easier to penetrate into a cyber network from a physical location that might be close at hand if you've been there a long time and you understand where all the facilities are and where all the points that you're able to penetrate from are, and they're not that hard, and very few of them are inside fence lines, are they, Lori?
Oh, you nailed it. And let's not forget about espionage. The spy may not be a Chinese citizen. The spy may be somebody who's being paid by China, incentivized by China to come in and work inside an installation. The human factor continues to be the most vulnerable part of the network, either from malicious acts or from plain stupidity. Oops, I forgot to change my password. Left my CAC in my laptop. All kinds of silly stuff. Is it just stupidity or forgetfulness, or is it malice? But the human actor continues to be the most vulnerable part of any network.
That's great. Now, I'm going to ask one more question before we get to the end of the show. But we're both from the electronic warfare world, too. I don't have the cyber experience that you have. So my question is, where is the, not overlap, but how can electronic warfare capabilities and cyber warfare capabilities used effectively to both defend ourselves and conduct offensive operations with those two capabilities at the same time and being used in conjunction with each other?
Well, you can use the spectrum to deliver cyber effects. You don't necessarily need to have a wired internet connection. Like, somebody can attack on this device even though it's not attached to anything, right? And they can deliver effects to this thing, cyber effects. They can download viruses and stuff like that, right? So that's perfectly capable to attack devices through the electromagnetic spectrum, through the EMS. So that is, certainly one way to do it. But man, you touched on a pet peeve of mine, and probably yours too, is the lack of awareness of defending the spectrum and keeping items on the spectrum safe. It's another invisible domain people really have trouble understanding, but it's even got less awareness than cyber has, if that's possible. What do you think?
That's what I think too. That's why I asked you the question, because I don't get the opportunity to have a cyber and electronic warfare expert all the time on this show. Well, Lori, thank you so much for joining us today. I've had your X account showing the entire show. I want to get you back at some point. Hopefully, the Trump administration is going to put you to work because we need some experts like you to help take a look at our posture from a cyber and electronic warfare perspective, just like we do our nuclear perspective. So have a great day. Tomorrow is Transition Tuesday. We'll be talking to Jake Novak about some transition discussion, but also about the news that there may be a deal on the hostages that Hamas took on October 7th. And as the president said, if they don't release them by the time he gets inaugurated, there's going to be hell to pay. What does that really mean? We're going to talk about it here on the Rob Maness Show on Worldview 2. See you then.
Ladies and gentlemen, Troy Smith here with Slingshot TV. It's been a tremendously successful week of shows. I want to thank everybody out there for making it successful, for sharing, commenting, retweeting, and liking the shows. It's been a hell of a week for me. Three different Stone Zone appearances with great guests like Joseph McBride, the attorney for the Tates, who also represents about 25 J6 defendants, as well as so many other interviews throughout the week. Robert Davi